So let's say you want to get a new phone and you don't want to spend more than $300 because you think, well, for $500 I could have bought an Xbox Series X, and that's this really powerful gaming system, or a PlayStation 5. I don't want to spend that much money on a phone, let alone twice that much money on a phone, because I don't want to walk around with a $1,000 electronic that I could end up dropping and completely breaking. Well, as it turns out, your options for a replacement device is becoming increasingly shrinking. As I recently found, besides Motorola and Samsung, there aren't many opportunities to buy a relatively inexpensive phone, be it an Android phone or an iPhone. You know, you're not getting an iPhone for less than $300, even that old looking SE version. So when it comes to Android phones, you really are down to strictly Motorola or Samsung. And what I found out very quickly was that Motorola seemed to be the way to go because they were still using Snapdragon processors even on these inexpensive phones, where Samsung has turned to using different brands of processors for many of their less expensive phones, probably as a cost-saving measure, and they do come with pretty good performance. But the truth is, many app developers optimize their apps to work primarily with Snapdragon processors. So these other brands of processors that, either Samsung is making themselves or they're throwing in aren't going to necessarily be well optimized for a lot of apps, and that can create additional bugs on an already inexpensive device. So I found that Motorola was probably the way to go in order to get the best experience, as well as the fact that Motorola is using a relatively stock version of Android. Not something like I quite had on my Pixel 2 XL back in the day, but a relatively stock version of Android with a few additions, whereas Samsung is using their Samsung sort of UI that some people like and some people dislike. But this isn't a video about what the best budget phone brand is, because that's subjective, because each brand has its own pros and cons, and you're going to get a lot of pros and cons when it comes to this price point. But the truth is, phones are not improving very much model over model like they were, say, 5+ years ago. It's much more of a slow evolution now. Features are being just trickled in each year, and it just doesn't seem like a big upgrade to get a new device anymore. That sort of stagnation makes buying a less expensive device seem very acceptable because it has a lot of the features you're looking for. And while it may be missing something like wireless charging, this isn't something everybody necessarily uses, and it warrants the question, is wireless charging worth spending, say, twice as much on your phone, or $200-$300 more? Is that feature really worth that much to you? But instead, we live in a disappointing reality where it seems like the number of accessible unlocked phones that are relatively inexpensive and aren't just those high-end flagships is continually shrinking. I really do feel like 5 years ago, there was a ton more lower spec, or at least lower cost options. And in part, that was because of companies like Huawei that were out there putting out just amazing budget devices that turned out to have some red flags of their own. As a result, with concerns over privacy, it became even more difficult to acquire one of these Chinese phones from a company like ZTE or Huawei here in America and actually use them on an American tower, or even get the newest, most current version. And while those were extremely budget devices, I understand how security is a thing that we should consider first and foremost when we're thinking about all the data that's in our phones. But nobody has come to really kind of fill that gap left by those companies, and now it feels like we're just sitting with Samsung and Motorola as the two big players in the unlocked phone market. Additionally, the accessibility of buying an unlocked phone without going straight from the manufacturer and instead buying from a third party like, say, Best Buy that may occasionally run specials is becoming more and more difficult, especially as Apple has taken away the ability to purchase an unlocked iPhone in anywhere other than an Apple store, as going to even something like Best Buy requires you to buy an iPhone that's locked to a carrier. While we continue to see more and more of these little handhelds be released that are able to play retro games, it was oftentimes a point of comparison that you would say, well, you could just buy an unlocked phone and use that strictly for gaming as well. Plus, if this was a device really strictly for gaming, you could even get yourself a prepaid phone, like something like a Boost mobile device, and just never activate deactivated or put service on it, and you'd have yourself a pretty nice gaming device for an inexpensive price, or at least that was the way it was a few years ago, as now a lot of these prepaid services will even require you to add money to the phone before it will even let you start using it. I'm talking you are completely locked out of the phone unless you put some degree of service on it. I understand that these prepaid phones oftentimes are an amazing deal, and that's because some of their cost is being subsidized. But you got to keep in mind that this is a prepaid phone. You should be able to quit using it whenever you want, and that is still the case. But the fact that you can't just open it up and use it without putting service on it in the first place is really disheartening and kind of a sign of the changing times around these less expensive devices. This is a disappointing change, but I hope that Motorola and Samsung, some of these other companies that are still making unlocked phones, will continue to do so going forward. I know it's a very important aspect to owning a phone and truly owning it that a lot of people do appreciate. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.